Okay, welcome everyone. Well, we're beginning a new series today, and we're following the custom of the Omer, which is right. Just count every day a um, different number because there are 49, 7 times 7 weeks from Passover to Shavuot. And it's considered to be like a journey. You're supposed to mark every day a step in that journey. You've left Egypt, but you haven't received Torah yet. And so it's a journey until you're ready to receive Torah. And there's this Kabbalistic custom actually, which is that every one of the days is a different Sifirah. It's a different quality you work on. And there's all these modern apps, right? There's these Omer apps where you go on it and you look at it, tells you today is this day and you should work on this quality because there's 7 Sifirot, but then there's 7 other. So every day, every week is one Sifirah, and then every day of that week is a different quality of that Sifirah. So we're not going to get into that level of technicality, but what we're doing is we're going to just look at the broader concept, which is, part of any religious path, spiritual path is working on our character, working on ourself, self-transformation, and
We can't have this class. Alan's not here.
no, how are we gonna know who's gonna read first?
They left on
They
their,
left
on
They
their
left
trip.
yesterday. They went they was going yesterday. They're doing some
Yeah,
road
no,
trip.
he wrote to find out if I had any suggestions for Amsterdam or and Paris.
Um, well, hope he has a good trip. But so every week we're going to look at a different concept that's related to themes of self-transformation. Well, but I think we're gonna have some fun with it. So one of them I think will be how to how to eat in a way that's spiritual, and that should be interesting. And the everyday battle of being a religious or spiritual seeker in the world and what that's like. And so we'll look at different concepts that I think are part of this general theme of transforming ourselves to be a fitting vessel. And so I thought we'd start with what's considered to be one of the things that even the most saintly people struggle with, which is anger, right? Anger is not an easy thing. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts in general about what's Judaism's approach or thoughts about anger.
Well, it's funny because, I read this article, an interview with Dara Horn about her new book. And in it, she talks about, Moses's anger in particular, how it's there all through the Torah. And it was in relation to the 4 children and, all that kind of stuff. But even our greatest prophet, couldn't control himself all the time.
Yeah.
What about God's thing?
Yeah, God gets angry too. God's
Yeah, for sure.
there.
Yeah.
But
My grandparents, before my father got married, told him that you never go to bed angry. And he has,
me that.
you never go to
It's
bed angry with your
Angry with
spouse.
your
you
spouse.
never go to bed angry.
Right.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, my mother told me that too.
Yeah.
You can start
Yes.
again the next day, but don't go to bed.
You can't sleep anyway if that's how you go to sleep.
How terrible you would feel, right?
Good advice, I
yeah.
think. Well, I'm not sure how practiced it is in our world, but there was there was also advice of how you cure that anger when going to bed. But so I mean, Moses is a great example. I've got a text here from the Torah which looks at the defining. He has 3 moments of anger. Moses has 3 moments of big anger in his story. So what's the first one? First one is when he sees
Kills the Egyptian.
when he kills the Egyptian, right? He sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, and he kills the Egyptian. Then the second one is, right, this is when he comes down and he sees the golden calf.
Right.
And what happens, and the Torah is explicit. Moses becomes furious and he throws and hurls the 10 Commandments on the ground. which I'm not sure was in God's plan for that to happen, that was a moment of, and I think we'll be talking more about that, but I remember reading a story, I don't even know what religion it was, of, some master who was able to do superhuman activities of fasting for 6 days a week. Every day would fast for 6 days a week. Every week would fast for 6 days a week. Couldn't control their anger. So, that's how hard controlling one's anger is. You can control everything to that extent, but you can't control your anger. It's not an easy thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that, that the whole time, during Passover, Moses never got angry at Pharaoh, not angry. At least he didn't show it. But other things got him.
Interesting, right? He never showed his anger to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
We saw.
Well, he had some big plans for Pharaoh that probably transformed his anger into some kind of secret action. The plagues were.
Yeah, it was God took over some of that. Interesting.
So what does this focus on anger say about righteous anger?
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of bringing it in, because it's interesting, because I think in our day and age, a lot of Jewish people feel that the power of righteous anger, but in a traditional aspect, I'm not sure there's much discussion of righteous anger, at least in the context of Moses or others. It's very
Pinchas.
Pinchas, but Pinchas is when it's God, right? When God gives, it's true. Pinchas is the one example I saw mentioned. God gives sanction to a moment of kind of righteous, almost violence against other peoples, or against sinners, but like uncontrolled anger. I think it's anger like being unhappy about something is fine, but anger, I think, denotes a loss of control. That's how Judaism sees what we call anger. When you lose control, you don't know anymore what you're doing, kind of like that. But we even have a term, right? Temporary insanity, right? When someone, out of anger, does something that they regret their whole lives, or something, that kind of, I didn't bring this particular source, but the Maggid of Mezerich, he says, when one is angry, and the problem is when you have a habit of becoming angry, it becomes worse and worse. But when you get to that point of losing your anger, he says you become disconnected from your soul. And then anything can happen because you don't have the influence of your soul. It's just like your bodily, your ego nature kind of takes control, and then bad things happen. Yeah.
So could there also be an aspect of anger in which anger is a signal of expectations have been violated, and maybe righteous anger is my expectations or God's expectations are right, and hence the emotion of violation of those is now legitimized, but maybe our anger, even if it's not totally out of control, it's that we have an unrighteous expectation.
Well, I think in general, Judaism wants you to see when someone's stepping on a boundary that's there, or whether it's your personal boundary or a societal boundary. It wants you to react, but it would always say it's better to do it from a place of, always better to do it from a place of humility. It doesn't mean you're not going to raise your voice and be strong, but it's there's story of a Rebbe who goes to a town, and in this town there's a snake that's been treating everybody else horribly, kind of like everybody's scared of this snake and living in this den. And so somehow the Rebbe goes and talks to the snake and is able to talk to the snake and says, what are you doing here? You know, don't you know that every creature needs to be quiet and needs to know its place. And so the snake becomes, okay, I'm going to just spend my time davening, you know, and so the snake, and then what happens is the children in the town start to take advantage and see the snake is no longer a threat and start to, you know, cause it harm. And eventually, you know, the Rebbe comes back and sees the snake is half dead and says, you know, I've been living by your concept and davening all the time and just doing, and he said, you fool, I told you not to bite, but you could still hiss. You know, so that there's a, so I think that it would always say that not coming from, you doesn't mean you don't raise your anger, you don't raise your voice, doesn't mean you don't show, you know, that there's something, but you do it from a place of control and of knowledge and of ultimate humility, not from a place of your ego is challenged by somebody else's.
Well, and if that happens, it can turn into vengeance,
Yeah,
because sort of righteous anger,
yeah,
as you think, you know, for example, I think what's happening in Israel with respect to its attitude towards the Gazans is vengeance. It's gone beyond, just being angry. That's my opinion.
yeah.
Now, vengeance is a little bit too far. What's the role of vengeance in Hebrew thought?
Well, I personally don't want to bring that up because it's a very complicated.
No, no,
It's-
no, forget
there's-
about the
I
issue.
think, you know, since you brought it up, it's complicated. And I think it is true that there are probably some soldiers who went in there who had that. How could they not after what happened? They're very family members, they're people raped
course.
and killed in such a personal, terrible way. And so, you know, I can't go in there and say I know exactly, but my personal opinion, at least, is what Israel is doing overall has come because you have to deal with living next door to a territory of 2 million people who are run by a terrorist organization who built more tunnels than there are subways under New York
Who
and
want to kill you.
who want to kill you. So, you know, I would say that I'm sure there were places where maybe there were some things went over the top, and especially individual soldiers or groups of soldiers or things where vengeance was invoked, which is wrong, you know, but it's different coming from you when it's coming from, I think, the outside. I know they're hearing that they're from some places, you know, people say, well, everything there was an article there was an article in the Wednesday Journal last week, which I found very upsetting because
Yeah, I read that. I was in, you know, I
Yeah.
don't get that paper, but I was somewhere and I
Yeah.
saw it and I picked it up. I couldn't believe that.
So, I'm not sure if there's two. There was one by a Jewish person, but there was one
The
from
letter to the
Ken
editor.
Trader. No, not even that. For me, it was, I didn't even read it, but there was one from one of the writers of the Wednesday Journal who was talking about, you know, how forgiveness, I mean, it's a few days before Easter, and he was talking about, and so the example he gave of people who are not being forgiving was Israel after what happened after, and it was very hard for me to see that a few days before Easter, written by a person who was not Jewish, that the example of
guy
people who are
who
now
wrote the letter.
forgiving and
It's a Jewish name.
yeah,
Sure.
I didn't even read it because I couldn't,
Disgusting.
but it, you know, it's true that it's very, you know, it's very hard to separate and to not have anger come up. And I've seen reports like everybody what's happening in Gaza and that some of the soldiers have been driven by revenge and invoked kind of religious things of revenge, which I find totally not the Judaism I believe in. But I feel at least there's a struggle there within the moral compass, and there are many soldiers who don't want that, and there's a struggle within the soul of the nation not to let that take over, and that's what we're talking about when anger takes you over, and you know the kind of complete. The opposite of that is what Hamas did, which there was absolutely no barriers, completely anger and lower nature completely took them over, and they did the most inhumane things. And when there's no battle going on, that's when you know you've you've lost it in your soul, you're not connected to your soul, and that's when despicable things happen, yeah.
I think it's a little bit dangerous to conflate anger and vengeance. I think
Yeah.
rhetorically, there's definitely a moral boundary between them. And then when you hear anger, you don't say that is immoral.
Yeah,
Your vengeance, you probably do, because it implies exactly what you're saying is a lack of control.
yeah,
And I think that we need to not conflate them and keep them as very distinct, because there's gray areas that are really important.
yeah, and I'm really, I'm, for this class, my focus is more on, less extreme forms of anger, and more the anger that we deal with in our, within our lives, with
Driving in
Yeah.
traffic on North
Yeah,
Avenue.
just
driving in
in our
traffic or
everyday lives.
everyday
that kind of
lives or-
anger.
and
Living caregiving.
and
Yeah.
what's that? Well, there's times where little bits of anger come out, and this is where we're all human beings, right? And that's part of what we're saying is even Moses, but they're part of the Moses thing, and we'll get to it later. I think is that there's a sense within the religious tradition and in general. I mean, let's go to it first, and then we'll.
May,
go
may I
back
say
to-
may I say something, Rabbi? You, Rabbi, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I don't mean to dwell on this, but since you raised the subject quite directly, I just want to say it's not just a question of individual soldiers, which is a very serious question in itself, but it's also a question of policy and what the government does and what the people do in accordance with that policy. And I just want to lay that down there because one thing anger does is become self-righteous, not just righteous, but self-righteous. And I think we see that in our own lives as well. I know that I do. Maybe I'm alone in that.
No,
And so the
I-
case of Pinchas, case of Pinchas is an interesting, problematic case because some have applied him as a kind of paradigm of when you should act against the halakha because for a higher reason. And you can open any number of doors with that. And that's all I wanted to
True.
say.
But no, it's true that I think there's no place for that, and even the rabbis themselves said with Pinchas, right? They give everybody the background of Pinchas, which I think is interesting in the context of our class, right? There was some thing that happened in the Torah where the Midianites had a whole group of Midianite women came and induced all the Israelite men into a big party, a big orgy, and everything was out of control. And so Pinchas got angry and took a spear and killed the worst offenders and started a count of let's put a stop to all of this. And then in the Torah, God gives the covenant of peace to Pinchas, which is very hard, especially in our modern day and age. But the rabbis point out that the letter Vav in the word Shalom in every Torah is broken. The Vav is like this. And that shows that the rabbis were uncomfortable with that level of that's not how we see it. That's not the way we want to go to peace. And so I agree the moment it becomes self-righteous anger on every side, I think it becomes, one wants to approach as best as one can, we're all human, as best as one can, and wants to approach situations with as much level-headedness as one can. And like I said, when there's still a struggle going on for this moral and ethical soul of a person over a nation, that there's something good going on there. And when there's no struggle, that's when you see whole societies have given over and don't even care anymore. They just think it's okay to commit complete terrible violence against others. So go ahead.
I just want to, I guess I see a point where anger turns to rage.
Yeah.
Rage is, I kind of look at that as being, like having no control
Mhm.
because you're so angry, you're kind of blind.
Yeah.
Where I think you can be very angry, but
Yeah.
still not lose control.
Yeah. I mean, and then I think the problem is when becoming very angry becomes a habit, eventually the rage comes out. And once the rage comes out, it's very hard to bring it back in. And once another person's experienced your rage, that marks the relationship. And so, but there's also different levels of power. It's like and there's very few spousal relationships where there's not some anger somewhere because of the amount of closeness and partnership that one has, but there's some relationships that are uneven or where one person has tremendous amount of power, and though it's very different in those situations when anger comes out. And so let's go to Moses. I want to go to our third source, and then we'll work our way backwards, because Moses again is the paradigm. And like Laurel said, it's written into the Torah. It's written into the Torah itself. The story of Moses. And so this is the third time. We spoke about the first two, very strong, where he kills one Egyptian is the first time. And the second time is when he smashes the tablets. And I mean, the first tablets were made by God himself. And the second tablets, it's considered to be a very big loss spiritually. It's something terrible to happen. And so here we come to the third example. Since you're sitting in Alan's seat, Bonnie, would you mind reading for us, if you don't mind?
Okay, where are we gonna start?
The third source on page 2, Numbers 30.
Yeah. Number 3.
Yes.
You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. Moses took the rod from before Adonai as he had been commanded. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock. And he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them."
But one of the names of God is Rock. It's that's one of the sort of
The rock.
names.
Yeah.
So there's something else going on here with respect to
Yeah.
striking the rock.
Well, there's different things of striking the rock, but one of the main elements of the story is listen, you rebels, and he was out of control. And one of the ways the tradition understands it is that Moses obviously was a man with tremendous spiritual power. I mean, it was through him the plagues happened, and he had tremendous responsibility and power. And a person of his stature shouldn't have lost his anger. And already, 3 strikes, and
3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah, you're out, right? And so the smashing of the tablets was a loss to the whole Jewish people for forever. And here, he was God. Maybe we have this tradition that Moses was the greatest prophet on one hand, but also says that he did not see God face to face in a certain place. And maybe him not coming into the land is a sense, a reflection of he didn't achieve in every part of him, maybe because of his anger, he didn't achieve in every part of him, maybe because of his anger. So it's sobering to think because someone of that power and of that responsibility didn't follow God's instructions in his anger. Right? God said, "Speak to the rock," and said he hit the rock. And Moses, someone who can make things happen, right? So that's not someone who should be losing their anger with the people while he's wielding God's staff and while he's wielding God's power. And so he got the worst punishment he could have possibly got. And after this, he doesn't lose his anger again.
It's cited, you cite Numbers chapter 30. There's something, I'm confused. Are you saying this is, I don't, that's not what I see in Numbers 30. Am I missing something? Am I in the wrong book?
Maybe I switched it up. Sorry, it's Numbers 8. I think it's Numbers 8.
Ah, okay. I kind of wanted to follow up on what David was saying and see what the word was. Oh, okay. Thank you.
What's the word in Hebrew there? Is it Abin?
It's not Numbers 8. No, wait. It's the parsha is Chukat. Let's see. Chukat Numbers.
Oh, okay. Still Numbers. All right.
It is, but I wouldn't bring the two up because it's 19 to 22. I don't know how I got the numbers 30.
Fine, I see it now, thank you.
Anyway, strike of the rock. Anyhow, we'll look it up. You know, the God
It's
is
Selah.
Sur Yisrael, which Sur Yisrael is like the opposite aspect of God, because it's the God, the unwavering, consistent, steady God who's always with us. It's not the God whose nostrils are flaring and who's get angry at us. You know, so I would say that's I mean, you know, maybe there's a whole other places in the Torah, God, he does strike the rock, and you know, there's other things, but I think in this particular case, there's a sense of loss of control, and I mean, it sends a really powerful example to all of us that in the Torah this has such a prominent place, and Moses is taken away, right? He's punished. He's punished. I mean, Maimonides says the anger is is idolatry. Because you're raising something up to the level of God. Let's go back to the beginning of the source sheet. This is one of the important parts of ethics of the fathers. Norma, if you don't mind reading source number 1 on the first page. Who is strong? Yeah,
Who is
number 1.
strong?
Oh, ethics of the fathers. Who is strong? He who subdues his evil inclination, as it is stated. He who is slow to anger is better than the strong man, and he who masters his passions is better than one who conquers a city. Proverbs 16:32.
Yeah.
Mastery of the anger also is a balancing act, and the anger gets balanced with compassion. Most of the feelings have their opposite. Okay, so to be able to remove or to moderate one feeling that you have, what you do is you lean towards the opposite. So if you're angry with a person, very angry with a person, and you at the same time try and activate compassion for that person, what's going to happen is the anger is going to be diminished. So and there's a lot, and most feelings have an opposite to them, you know, in language, so that if you can activate the opposite of the thing, you get to the center, and you get to a balance between the two feelings, between anger and compassion, which is a sort of a soft form of, I'm not sure what that feeling is because it doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
It's a mixture.
So we have a whole. There's the other part of the source sheet where there are other, I think, a whole bunch of techniques for how do you deal when anger comes up. And one that's similar to one you mentioned, which is not here. Again, the Maggid of Mezrich says that it's like when you, what do you do to get the honey from the beehive? Remove the bees. What do? You blow smoke, and so that removes the bees. So how do you remove the anger? That's like bees, right? When it's going, you can't control it. And he says loving kindness. So if you fill your heart with loving kindness, then and that removes the anger. If you suddenly feel yourself overcome by anger, you try and bring in tremendous amount of love. And that's how it's kind of, you fill your heart with that love, and that gets the bees of your anger to calm down.
But being able to do that, you see a lot of self-consciousness and control in a way, to be able to excite in yourself at will an opposite feeling. Most people are completely enslaved to their feelings. Whatever they feel, they feel.
Yeah.
But
especially anger. Especially anger is one, because this again when they put into Baal Shem Tov says it's because it's your ego that's being, right, it's your I that's being attacked, right? So often when that's what kind of raises up, it's your ego. So he says you have to go what's behind your ego, the self of you, that part of yourself that's not connected to ego. And from that place, who cares? It's not like you really are, if a person says, you're a donkey, it's not like suddenly you grew a tail and 4 legs, and you became a donkey, but that's how we feel, right? It's when someone said something about us, or say, oh yeah, is that who we are? And then suddenly our ego goes up. And
I think a lot of it has to do with the look on your face also. Not just, if you're angry, it's pretty hard.
what
not to
projects,
show
one
it.
projects, and in the that's when the rage, right? I mean, anger, we all feel, sometimes anger projects some, and we often respond to the intensity of what's come to us, right?
Yeah.
When someone comes with tremendous anger to one, it's very hard. It's usually one is either responds or one goes into shock, like, wow, I feel shocked by this amount of anger that came my way. And then I mean, if one is nice, we can say, is everything okay that you're displaying that level of anger? But often you want to bite their head back off, right? So
So one.
I agree with David, if you're able to
Turn into resignation.
realize that you're that angry and try to do something about it, you're already halfway there. You know,
it's hard.
It's
Calming
very
yourself.
difficult.
It's very hard.
Switch
So
up.
we're gonna read a bunch of stuff, and David mentioned one, I mentioned another, but we're gonna read a bunch of them of like literal techniques. Sorry, Barbara, do you mind saying that again? What you were saying?
At what point does either the subduing or the
Yeah,
opposite turn into a resignation that's passivity and a giving up?
yeah. But well, I think I think
How do you?
How do you watch
I think it's just calming. If it's doing it because you don't want to confront something that needs confronting, I think it is that. But if it's just giving you a level head before you react, I think it's always good to have that level head.
But I'm
Or
thinking of
or
it in terms of that there is a power element there.
yeah,
That's, there is in many cases,
Yeah.
I'm thinking extreme cases of, oppression.
yeah,
So,
yeah. How do you respond to how does it, is it not righteous anger faced with oppression against one? I know it's the touchiest subject in this whole conversation, and there's different ways of looking at it, and I would say based on some of this, it would still be a sense of, approaching, at least having a battle with that righteous anger and not letting it overcome one, and do acts that one would later, even if it's against,
Or
even less a
transcending
sense
the
of
whole
yourself,
thing,
or even
or transcending the whole thing.
yeah, even
Okay.
if you, I mean, it's really easier to say it for us here sitting than if it's happening to one. But if you're talking, about I mean, I think there's a place where in the absolute worst depression, people are turning other people into animals. And then there's like an animal reaction from within a human being of complete anger. But I'm not sure that actually helps the person. I mean, it might send a clear message to the oppressor, look what you've done to another human being, but I'm not sure it helps the person it doesn't make their case. It doesn't help their soul, but sometimes when you push a person to the edge, then there's certain point, so one can understand, but I mean, it's a very hard subject, and it's very hard to judge when you haven't been in that place, right? And so, but there's, I think it's better to keep it our personal lives right now, or it's Holocaust Day, so I always tell the story in the Holocaust, which is not the only thing that happened, but I do share the story often of when one of the camps, when the Russians came and liberated the camp and saw what had happened, and they returned to the inmates and they said, we rounded up the Nazi guards, they're in that place over there, here's some weapons, we'll look aside for the next 24 hours. And the inmates of the camp said, if we do that, we'll lose our humanity.
Yeah,
It's the only
we'll be
thing.
the same as
We're
they.
dead.
Exactly. They've already taken everything away from us. They've taken our homes, they've taken our families. And the only thing we have left is our dignity and our humanity, and we're not going to lose that. So I think there's a place, there's a place where that's the highest path, and I think that when one is able to come from that place. On the other hand, you can say the Nazi guards were no longer a threat to them at that moment, and so it was a question of vengeance or not. That was the question, and there are other times where vengeance was taken, but I think that so. Very big question. Let's read Nachman of Breslov, Ryan, if you don't mind.
Sure. There is no wholeness except in God, and apart from him, everyone is incomplete and deficient. But whoever is joined with him is whole and complete. And the main manner in which joining with the oneness takes place is through knowing God. As the wise one said, if I knew him, I'd be him. because the essence of a human being is his mind, and therefore whatever the mind is thinking about, there the whole of the person will be. And when he knows and attains the knowledge of God, he is literally there with God. And the more he knows God, the more he will be joined with his supernal source, that is God. And everything that a person lacks, be it a livelihood, children, bodily health, as well as all other lacks, all of it is in reality a lack of consciousness. And even though there are people who completely lack any state of consciousness, and yet they have all good things in truth, everything that they have is worth nothing. And the opposite is also true. Someone who is whole, right in a state of consciousness, yet lacks something, in truth, his lack means nothing to him. As the rabbis have said, he who has won acquired a state of knowledge, what does he lack? He who has not acquired a state of knowledge, what does he possess? Because the essence of the experience of wholeness and lack is dependent upon our state of consciousness. And anger and cruelty also come from a lack in consciousness, as it states in Ecclesiastes 7:9. For anger rests in the bosom of fools. In the future, an expanded consciousness will be revealed, and everyone will know God, as it states in Isaiah 11:6-8. And the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the cow and the bear. They shall not hurt nor destroy, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord. Because now it is not possible for the wolf and the lamb to lie together because of the attribute of anger. But in the future, they will be able to dwell together because anger will be eradicated by the expanded consciousness, which will be revealed in them.
So it's, I mean, it's a very, very deep,
Very
and
profound.
very profound
nuanced
teaching.
stuff. Yeah.
Very profound teaching by Rabbi Nachman, and about, I mean, all parts of it really are very hard to live in the moment, but very profound teaching. And in the, you know, if one is living from that humanity place in its purest sense, then one doesn't experience that anger, and that's in that place. I think even dealing with injustice, I think that's the most power. I mean, that's Gandhi on some level, but it's very hard, but I don't even think this means a pacifistic way of looking. It doesn't mean pacifistic. It just means from where it comes from in terms of the anger.
Well, apparently you're looking at it from God's perspective.
Yeah.
So that in this particular experience that you're having, you're actually, he is saying, being with God, looking at it from his perspective, feeling yourself to be God at the same time. And that's a very interesting feeling. If you've had that, that's really a good deal. And you should tell your, well, I'm just kidding. But anyway, what would that feel like to be what he's talking about?
It
What would be
reminds me
the
of the
experience?
earlier part of our course. It's
Yeah.
like that oneness with God, is
Exactly.
that transcendent
It's-
thing.
it's-
That he's really kind of saying,
That's
learn how to
consciousness.
bring that back down. to earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you have that a godly consciousness, even when those things happen, then you see we're all one, and you'll realize this person who I'm also one with just did this to me. Maybe you have to hiss back at them, but you're not going to let it take over you, and you're not going to do this, and you're not going to make it lose that unity of consciousness, because that's this is what I love most about this teaching. In the end, that's the most important thing, right? Because you could have everything in the world, but if you don't have at least a drop of this consciousness, then you're just going to go around your life saying, oh, my lacks, I have everything. My life is terrible. And if you have more than a drop of it, it doesn't matter what lacks you have, your life is full.
And it's a very different kind of knowledge than intellectual.
It is different, very different knowledge. Yeah, it's consciousness, right? It's
I was just thinking about like this level of consciousness, just practically like, you know, you're driving and somebody cuts you off and gives you the middle finger, and the level of consciousness says that doesn't matter. That just, it's nothing.
Well, what happens is
say that first part again about the little finger.
So, yeah, so you're driving and somebody cuts you off and gives you the middle finger. A state of consciousness says that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
But if on a sidewalk, I see a man slapping his wife, like, whoa, hold on, that matters, so I am gonna stop the car.
you're gonna,
I'm
you're gonna
stand
stop, you're
between
gonna
them,
get out of, and you might even show anger to stop it from
That's right.
happening.
because that matters.
But you'll do your best not to
That's right.
lose your unitive thing, and
That's right.
you'll be guided anyway by
That's
that
right.
unitive consciousness that you'll have to do the right thing, and I
Right.
think that's. But you're not gonna suddenly get anger or make it about you, it's nothing to do with you, it's about what's happening there, and I think.
So this consciousness, that unites you with the divine also removes your particularity. It
Mhm.
removes your bodily experiences, really. That would be in the extreme. So
Right.
you're
Well-
united, here you are, you're united with the divine, and you're not feeling your body in the same way. And you're not feeling
Mhm.
other people's bodies in the same
Well,
way.
you're part of the divine
You're part-
consciousness,
yeah,
so
you're
part
part
of
of-
your,
you're
part of
part-
your will is subsumed in the divine will,
Right,
so you.
right, right.
And the more you're into it, the more, and this is what they talk about, the goal of everything we've been talking about this whole course, is when you completely get there, then your will and the will of the universe is one, and then you're always acting from that place of greater love and good and unity, and so we can, the more you're in that space, the more you're not in these places of lack of consciousness, and that's why for Moses to lose that consciousness was so dangerous, for him to lose his place, that consciousness was just, what would he do? He could do terrible things with the power, with
Well,
who
he
he
becomes
was.
the black magician.
Suddenly, exactly, and so it was so out about the black magician, but he could, that sudden, to lose to the point where he's screaming at the people, and but here he has the power, and he can do something really. I don't know if he could have gone quite to that of turning, to something else, but in the fit of anger, who knows? Who knows? He could have.
But in some ways it makes him a human, like he's so
Yeah.
finely put upon and he's a human too, and he reacts. I'm not saying it's right, or that he should have.
No. I think that gives us, I think you're right, and including it,
That gives us, I think you're right,
solace.
and including.
A
We're
little.
all on the journey, we're all doing our best to
Yeah,
to
you
know.
can't absolutely transcend your body and your human experience. Now, maybe you can. Maybe
Very
if you're
rare.
really,
It's
not
very
in this
rare.
culture, not in this culture very often. Although I met a guy in a mental hospital many years ago who was a very strange guy. When I came to see, they asked me to come and see him because they knew I was interested in people like this, sitting in a chair in a yoga position, and he hadn't spoken to anybody in 20 years. Okay, and he was being taken care of, etc. Now, the thing is he was always in this state. He was always in this state. Anyway, I tormented him in a way that I did. And I got him to talk to me, and he told me to. His first words in 20 years were bugger off.
Interesting, well,
It's very, so the thing is, you can't have a human life in any form that we define it and be in that state all the time with all people. You can be partially in that state. You can always reach for it in order to offset some of the difficulties you might be having in your human life, but you can't all the time.
I think we can't, but there are very few cases, but there are cases of masters who reach that, and the story of the Buddha, where some people like this, people like to do that to them. And someone came and, most insulting possible, and this is a story the Buddha says, I will not accept your gift, and so
Yeah.
so I think, and there's stories of some other, I can't remember who, but the people came to him, and he would just show a profound and different. The mind would just go somebody completely other, and they're saying all these things and insulting and insulting and insulting and insulting and insulting and saying the worst things and absolutely no answer. So but for most of us, we can't.
The opposite of that is
Yeah.
also true, to compliment them.
It's
Okay.
true. Yeah, they're both.
You don't
they're-
really
it's-
want to insult.
they're
them. You
both
wanna see-
chains.
You want to see how he handles his compliments.
Yes, it's true.
If he handles his compliments by sort of glowing,
Exactly.
then you're not dealing with the right person.
Well, they say that if you give, same thing, that the the positive ego, so to speak, is also a chain. It's a golden chain, but it's also a chain. That's the way they call it, right? So it's like someone give you, you're so used to all the compliments and feeling good and everything, and then you try taking away from a person. Oof, that's hard, So
I remember
But,
68 years ago, when I first got married, my sister-in-law and I had an argument. And I felt bad about it, so I went to her and I said, I want to apologize, and she said, I don't accept your apology. What do you do with that? I
Yeah.
mean, we're the best of friends, but at
Yeah.
that time it was, get
Mhm.
out of my face.
Well, I think, what I find powerful about that story is that for you, maybe you felt some anger, as we all do, but it came in and left,
Yeah.
and that's the most powerful way to deal with anger. It comes in and left. When you carry it, and then it's working within you, this is one of my kids' books. My kids have a book, it's called, it's about a panda who's a Zen teacher. It's a
Oh,
very good-
yeah.
Yeah, the
That's
panda
good.
tells him a story to teach these kids about, there are these two Zen monks who are walking and they encounter some wealthy woman who's come back from shopping, and she's being carried by four people, and they come to like a knee-deep mud, and they won't take her through the mud, and she's screaming at them and screaming at them. So the old monk at a certain point just comes up, kind of leans down, and she steps on his back, and he goes through the mud, and then he puts her off, and they walk. And the younger monk is just disgusted that he would do this for her. And 4 hours later, he turns to the elder and says, how could you do that? She was such a terrible person and treated those people, and she treated you like you were nothing. And he said, I put off my load 4 hours ago, but you're still carrying the load now.
Oh,
That's
that's
So
good.
that's kind of a true story, so that same
good
kind
story.
of story.
My husband
Yeah.
says to me, it's not on you anymore. It's
Yeah,
on me."
exactly. So let's go to number 5, and read some of the other little techniques I think are all interesting. Morris, if you don't mind, number 5.
Nachman of Breslov. Puti Mahala. Anger and unkindness arise when people's understanding is limited. The deeper their understanding, the more their anger disappears, and kindness and love and peace spread. This is why the study of Torah, which deepens the understanding, brings love and peace into the world and banishes anger.
Yeah, so I put a Hebrew word letter there for some reason, but yeah. So let's keep on going. He has a bunch of techniques here. I will find interesting. Go ahead. Immersing. Morris.
Okay. And immersing in the mikvah is also an antidote to anger, because immersing in the mikvah brings understanding.
So mikvah is like a ritual. So if you approach a ritual cleansing with that intention, then it kind of cleanse yourself of how you're feeling, it kind of restores your balance and brings knowledge and understanding in a place of connection, right? What we were talking about, consciousness that he was talking about, that comes back, and you want to live your life in that place. Then number 7. Go ahead,
Maybe
yeah.
it's just cold and it snaps you out of it.
Yeah, so I think so too. I think like a good shower, for all of us who don't go,
Yeah.
a good shower, a good
Makes you
cold
feel
shower,
good.
or even a regular shower.
Cleans you inside and
Exactly,
outside.
cleans you short hour and gets you cool down a little bit. Morris.
Through the sanctity of the land of Israel, it is possible to break the force of anger, depression, and laziness completely. For this reason, one must plead with God to be worthy of coming to the land of Israel speedily. There is a person who can attain tranquility in the face of any experiences who may undergo. He will never be angry or upset with anyone, no matter what.
So
they have done.
he's talking about not a physical place, but a spiritual place, and that there's elements of that spiritual place in the physical place. But he's talking about the eternal land of Israel, the upper land of Israel and upper Jerusalem. So it's kind of, you fix your mind on some space of holiness, and this and that helps take you out of that.
It's might be the prayer in the Siddur as we wrap ourselves in the
Yeah,
Talit, may I be
Mhm.
worthy
Yeah,
to share in the world to come. And it's like almost like just imagine the Talit being the compassion and warmth of God, and boy, how can you be angry? It's, how merciful he's been to me.
I love that. Very powerful. Yeah, all these positive rituals that take us away from that, allowing that to be what's taken hold of us and gone deeply into us, and coming back to the other place. In the end, we can't control all the happenings in our lives. But what we can control is what he said in that other teaching, where our mind is that's the best we can do most of the time. That's the work. And Barbara, if you don't mind meeting the last one, this is from Nachum of Chernobyl Rebbe, or in
No one leaves this world with half of his desire in his hand. This refers to those who are considered like dead even while they are alive, as is written. Evildoers are called dead even during their lifetimes. A person who recognizes the truth will not let him or herself fall into this state. Rather, they will rest in a state of contentment, as is written. Who is rich? The person who is happy with their lot. Such a person is truly rich because they feel no sense of lack. That is, in their own eyes, it always seems to them. This is what it truly means to be called wealthy.
So we're going to be spending a whole session on contentment in the next 4 or 5 weeks.
A large part of this, an internal development that has to do with what people call meditation. So it has to do with being slowly but surely getting in touch with the self-referencing aspect of yourself. Okay. Your inner being is sort of a strange thing. And none of this works unless you have a deep connection to the inner being. Now, you can call the inner being the self, you can call it the I. I see it as a self-referencing function. It's something that reminds you, it's something that is with you all the time, that you notice, and then you don't notice it because it's so commonly there. But this thing that's there, you have to sort of be aware of that. And then all of these exercises become a reality. You can actually do these things, but you can't do these things until you are aware of yourself.
Barbara's.
If we go back again to the earlier part of the course, and there was that story with the fool and the wise man, and the fool was really the wise man. He did not have that inner self that you're talking about. So that's another side.
It's really interesting. I'll say there. Right. Well, I think, and I have to leave a little bit early, so I'll say that there's, like we've been saying this whole time, there's different paths to that consciousness, and there is a one path which you're talking about to some degree, which is that lech lecha, right? Go to yourself, and that kind of going deeply into the self of all selves, into the place that's beyond all ego and beyond this. And from that place, none of this can touch you. I think that's one of the paths of the Hasidim, but the Hasidim also have another path, which is kind of from the other things you've been talking about, which is, immersing yourself just in love and immersing yourself in holy simplicity, and those things also have the power to put you in a united consciousness. Doesn't take you to that self of all selves, which is I think those are two different places, and both are very powerful. I think we all have, some of us want to go to that place that transcends all, that, the core of everything, and other places, living in holy simplicity, living in humility, living complete compassion and love and contentment and acceptance, and that place also, when you're living in that united consciousness. And I think in general, I loved how we were earlier talking about, and how you brought up the example of, someone cutting you off or this or that, or even if someone cuts you off and you say something, but if you're in that space, it's not going to take you out of it. And the more one is in that space, which in some degree, I think is the goal of everything we've been talking about in this whole course, is how you can remain in that space as much as possible. It's good for everything, because we all have lacks in our lives. It's part of living in this world, and some have much worse lacks than others. And some people, on the other hand, some people have everything. And I know a lot of people who have everything and who have absolutely no financial worries, or have everything, families and health and everything, and for some reason they're just in terrible misery.
But they don't have that comfort.
They don't have that united consciousness. They're in personal turmoil. And there's some people who have, when I first moved to Nepal, and it's a little bit of a trite example, I'll admit, but I remember going past these children who were looking through garbage every morning. When I first arrived in Nepal, I looked at them and I thought, these poor, poor, poor children, which their lives were horrible. But I remember going a few months later, looking at their faces and actually seeing how much joy they had in their lives. And they weren't educated and they lacked food, but they were living in a sense of joy. And it is possible in many different, and being in Nepal and India, where there's so much poverty and backbreaking poverty and terrible things, and you know, what's the lifespan for people living that very, very low because of the, you know, everything. But they still live their lives of joy and they go through it as best possible. And
Because they think
Yeah.
about what they have. and what
yeah,
they
and
don't have.
here we have everything, and you know, we have so much, but we're all struggling. And so the part of the anger is trying to find that space, and it's a challenge for all of us. I have to run, but next week we'll have another session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.